The silence was a roar, a sound that vibrated with the presence of everything that was gone. Every breath I drew felt like a stolen gasp, filling lungs that were full yet hollowed out by absence. We had found water, clear and cold, but every drop burned with the promise of a thirst that could never truly be quenched. My eyes tracked the light, a crimson flicker against the pale ceiling. It's 3 a.m. Or 3:07. It changes every time I check the screen, a small digital lie I tell myself to make the passage of time feel less absolute. I've been up since 2, maybe earlier. The hum of the refrigerator is constant, an indifferent presence. I think about the water bottles, lined up perfectly in the door, their plastic sides beaded with condensation. Always enough water here. Too much, sometimes. It's the water that keeps bringing me back. Not the bottles themselves, but the knowledge of what it felt like to not have them. Or to have them, but know they were poison. I remember the grit in my teeth, the way my tongue felt like sandpaper, thick and useless. The sky was that electric ice blue you only get when the dust finally settles after something monumental has been torn apart, when the air is too clear, too still. Everything was a shade of ruined ochre, but the sky, that high, indifferent expanse, was a perfect, piercing blue. We were in Sector 7, or what was left of it. The official reports called it the debris field. I called it the place where gravity decided to take a holiday. I wasn't supposed to be there, not really. I was a consultant, a logistics specialist, brought in late, too late, because the official channels had choked. They needed someone who could map supply routes without a map, someone who understood the flow of things when everything was broken. I understood the flow of water, of people, of desperation. My job was to tell them where the clean sources might be, where the contaminated ones were sure to be. I had a satellite phone, a crimson one, the kind that screamed emergency even when it was just sitting silent in my torn cargo pants pocket, and a laminated map, carefully folded, now useless. Dr. Alara Vance, head of their medical team, she called me the ground truth. Her voice was always smooth, polished, even when she was standing in ankle-deep sludge. She had eyes like chipped ice, and a permanent crease between her brows, as if perpetually calculating the cost of human life. She'd nod at my reports, those hastily scrawled diagrams on the back of requisition forms, and then she'd look at me, truly look, and I'd know she wasn't seeing the data. She was seeing the numbers in bodies. The real mistake here is thinking any of us had a choice. We always had a choice, just not the one we wanted. It was about choosing which way the current would take you, not whether you'd drown. That's what they never tell you about these situations. It's not about heroism, it's about microdecisions made in a haze of exhaustion and that constant, metallic taste of fear. I was good at seeing things others missed, the subtle signs. The way the water shimmered just slightly different near the old chemical plant. The sheen on the surface after the rains. I kept pointing it out, in my dry, technical reports. My voice was always calm, even when my stomach was a clenched fist. High probability of specific heavy metal contamination here, I'd say, pointing to a crimson ink circle on my map. Runoff models indicate an unacceptable risk for potable use. Alara would just press her lips together. We have to work with what we have, Kai, she'd say, her voice tight but still professional. The filtration units are failing. We have 15,000 people in Sector 6, another 10,000 in 9, and the trucks can't get through to either. I'm still not sure if I made the right choice, or if there even was a right choice. Maybe you felt this too, that agonizing suspended state where every path forward leads to a different kind of loss. I remember thinking about beeswax. It was so utterly out of place. The air was thick with the scent of pulverized concrete and something acrid, metallic, but for a split second, a single breath, I could almost smell beeswax. My grandmother used to polish her antique chest with it, a faint, sweet, comforting scent. I must have been so dehydrated my brain was just, shorting out. It was absurd. It was the worst moment, and I thought about beeswax. I haven't told anyone that. The anomaly, when it became undeniable, wasn't a sudden explosion or a structural collapse. It was the pattern. The children, first. Their slow, inexplicable decline, even in the safe zones. Not the obvious dehydration, not the immediate infections, but something quieter, creeping. Their eyes, dull and wide. Their small hands, trembling. I kept cross-referencing the intake logs with the water distribution. Different teams were running different zones. Information was siloed. I started drawing connections, little crimson lines between columns of data, between the zones where the new cases appeared and the water sources they were using. It was so obvious. So obvious to me, anyway. This is exactly where everything changes, where the line blurs. I had the data. I had the models. I had the smell of it, that subtle, chemical tang I couldn't articulate in a formal report but knew in my bones. The water they were distributing to the new arrivals, the ones in the hastily constructed camps in the south, was tainted. Not enough to kill quickly, not enough for an immediate panic, but enough to slowly, systematically, break them down. Enough to make them easy targets for opportunistic infections, for the weakness to take hold. I remember approaching Alara in the operations tent. The fluorescent lights hummed, a cruel imitation of daylight. The air was stale, thick with the smell of sweat and antiseptic. She was hunched over a map, a crimson pen clutched in her hand, marking something. Her shoulders were hunched, the weight of the world on them. The South Camp, I said, my voice quiet. The well. It's not just particulate. It's chemical. She didn't look up immediately. Her pen made a thin, scratching sound. We ran the field tests, Kai. They came back within acceptable parameters. Barely. But acceptable. The field tests are rudimentary, I pushed. They don't screen for everything. I'm telling you, it's more than that. The symptoms match. The slow onset, the neurological indicators in the worst cases. It matches the profile for a specific heavy metal contaminant from the old industrial zone. It's leaching into the groundwater. She finally looked up. Her eyes, those chipped ice fragments, met mine. They were exhausted. And your solution, Kai? We have 2 functional water trucks. One is already committed to the hospital. The other is running a 24-hour loop to the north, where we have critical cases of cholera. Do you want me to cut off the hospital? Or let the cholera spread? I didn't have a solution. I just had the truth. A truth that was incredibly inconvenient. A truth that would require admitting a huge mistake had been made, that thousands of people had been drinking poison because the quick field tests hadn't been enough, because the system had been too slow, too rigid. It's strange, the things you notice when your mind is racing. Like the way the electric blue tarp on the ceiling of my bedroom ripples slightly with the central air vent. It reminds me of the plastic sheeting we used to patch up the tent in the South Camp, flapping in the wind, a futile shield against a hostile world. I had known something was wrong longer than I admitted, even to myself. The data, the faint unease in my gut, it had been there for days before I managed to connect all the crimson dots. I'd seen the first reports of the children's symptoms, dismissed them as general malnutrition or stress. I wanted to believe the field tests were adequate. I wanted to believe someone else was on top of it. But then the numbers grew, and my own internal analysis screamed. We need a full lab analysis, I said, my voice barely a whisper. From a dedicated facility. We need to stop distribution from that well, immediately. Alara stared at me. Her face was grim. Kai, if we stop distribution, we have a riot. We have dehydration, fast. We have an immediate crisis. The slow burn you're describing, it's not as immediate. She paused, then added, her voice lower, and if your assessment is wrong, if we cause a panic over nothing, the support, it dries up. You understand what I'm saying? I understood. I understood that the truth, my truth, was expensive. It cost resources, reputation, political capital. The lie, or at least the quiet omission, was cheap. It allowed the system to continue, to appear to be functioning. I remember Javier. He was one of the local volunteers in the South Camp. Young, maybe 25. His eyes, though weary, had a fierce, electric blue light in them. He helped me map the local paths, showed me old, forgotten routes through the rubble. He was the one who filled the water containers from that well, day after day, for his family, for his neighbors. He trusted us. He trusted me. He saw me, the consultant with the satellite phone, the one who looked at the maps with such intensity. He thought I had answers. What strikes me at this point is how easy it was for them to marginalize the inconvenient truth. Not maliciously, perhaps, not with a flick of a switch, but through 1,000 tiny, professional rationalizations. The greater good. Resource allocation. Preventing panic. All logical, all defensible on paper. But paper doesn't drink poison. I watched Javier fill another crimson jerrycan, the water glinting in the pale sun. He looked up, smiled, a flash of white in his dust-caked face. He lifted a hand in a small wave. And I knew. I couldn't unknow it. We need to reroute, I said, my voice flat. Even if it means a longer journey, we need to find another source. Or we need to treat that water for heavy metals. We need specialized filters. Ilara sighed. It was a deep, weary sound. We don't have them, Kai. We don't have the time. We don't have the trucks. And frankly, we don't have the political will to admit we've been distributing tainted water for days. The report is going out tonight. The one that says all sources are within acceptable, albeit challenged, safety parameters. She held my gaze. It was a silent challenge. My flaw, I realize now, was mistaking thoroughness for action. I kept researching, kept analyzing, when the research was already complete. The data was there. The decision, though, had already been made by others. What would you have done? When the choice is between an immediate, visible disaster and a slow, invisible one, and you know the truth of both, how do you choose? How do you stand against an entire system that has already decided? I remember the satellite phone, heavy and cold in my pocket. I could have called someone higher up. I could have. But to whom? Who would listen to an independent contractor over the official report of an established aid organization? It would have been my word, my unverified, to them, data, against their carefully constructed narrative of controlled chaos. It would have meant destroying their credibility, potentially cutting off all aid, creating an even bigger disaster. Or so I told myself. I didn't make the call. Not then. I looked at Javier, still filling the crimson jerrycans, his face streaked with dust, and I felt a cold dread settle in my stomach. The electric blue of his shirt, faded with sun and wear, stood out against the ochre landscape. The next day, Ilara called me into her temporary office, a small tent set up away from the main operations. The air inside was stifling, even colder than outside in a way. The light, harsh and unyielding, cast sharp shadows. She had a piece of paper in her hand, a single photograph. It was a close-up of a water sample, under a microscope. The image was grainy, but clear enough to see the distinct, telltale crystalline structures. Crimson dots against a pale background. This came back from the lab we managed to get a sample to, through the military transport, she said, her voice flat, devoid of emotion. Your hypothesis was correct. It's definitive. I felt a surge of something, vindication. Horror. Both. So we stop distribution. We pull the well. We announce it. She looked at the photograph, then at me. Her eyes were different now. Not just exhausted, but haunted. We can't. Not publicly. The repercussions, it would be too catastrophic. For everyone. They're already under fire for the delays, the initial response. Admitting this now, it would unravel everything. She handed me a printed report, fresh from the field printer. My previous reports, my warnings, were referenced, but carefully reinterpreted. Initial concerns regarding water quality were addressed with enhanced filtration protocols, it read. A carefully constructed lie. An elegant fiction. What do you want me to do? I asked. My voice was a stranger's. You're the ground truth expert, Kai, she said, her voice low. You can help us manage this. Quietly. We implement a secondary filtration system, discreetly. We prioritize the most vulnerable. We move people, slowly, without explanation. We contain the problem, without destroying the trust that allows us to operate at all. She was asking me to be complicit. To not say what I knew. To let the quiet loss continue, unseen, so that the bigger, more visible aid operations could persist. Her face was set. She wasn't asking for my opinion. She was giving me my new directive. Her motivation, I knew then, was not personal malice, but the cold, clinical preservation of the institution itself. The larger good, as she defined it, required a certain amount of managed truth. I remember the silence in that tent, broken only by the distant thrum of a generator. My mind was analytical, breaking down the options. Speak out, risk everything, probably achieve nothing but chaos. Or work within the system, try to mitigate the damage silently, and live with the knowledge. I didn't say yes. I didn't say no. I just took the report. I looked at the photograph again, the crimson dots, the undeniable proof. And then I looked at Alara, her face now a mask of professional resolve. She had made her choice. Now I had to make mine. I remember thinking about the photograph of the water sample for days. It was just a snapshot, a tiny, clinical detail, but it contained a universe of suffering. I never saw that photograph again after that day. I sometimes wonder if Alara kept it. Javier was one of the ones who made it out. I saw him months later, in a transit camp, pale and thin, but alive. We didn't talk about the water. We talked about the market, about the rebuilding efforts, about the hope for rain. But his eyes, when they met mine, held a specific kind of knowledge. A shared silence. Maybe he sensed my complicity. Or maybe he just knew. You ever have that? That silent understanding with someone, where you know they know something specific about you, something you've never uttered a word about, but the connection is just there. The electric blue light from my phone screen casts long shadows across the bedroom ceiling. It's 3:38 a.m. now. I pick up the small, framed photograph on my bedside table. It's a picture of Javier, smiling, from before. Before everything. His electric blue shirt is vibrant, almost glowing. I still look at his face sometimes, trying to find an answer, trying to find a question. I'm not going to pretend this resolved cleanly. It didn't. It just settled. Like dust. What's the shelf life of a lie, I wonder? Or of a truth that was never allowed to breathe? It's a different kind of quiet now, this knowing. What stays with me from that time, even now, is the crimson report in my hand and the way Alara Vance looked at me, her eyes daring me to speak. It wasn't a threat, not in the usual sense. It was just an acknowledgement of the impossible cost of truth in that moment. And my honest reaction to her decision to suppress the truth. It was a cold, quiet resignation. Because for all my analysis, for all my data, I didn't do anything different. I didn't speak. I wonder, sometimes, what small, specific truth you've held on to, knowing its cost was too high. The narrator stayed silent about the crimson dots. If you were in that tent, staring at Alara's professional resolve, would you have spoken out about the water report? If stories about impossible choices, silent burdens, and the true cost of survival resonate with you, then you've found your community. Join us as we explore these complex human truths. This story asks us about the heavy cost of silent complicity, and the truths we hold back for a greater good. Who in your life needs to hear about the lingering weight of that unspoken burden? What small, specific truth have you held on to, knowing its cost was just too high? Tell me in the comments, I need to know. If that specific kind of shared silence, that quiet knowing between two people, resonated deep within you, the like button is right there. If you're someone who understands that not all truths are meant to breathe, and some things just settle like dust, this channel is for you.